Okay, hi there. Today we're going to be looking at pre-calculus, the graphing sine of x and cosine of x. So this is the general equation that we use for graphing sine and cosine. You could easily change this sine to cosine. Eventually we'll get to tangent. In fact, I put some directions at the bottom there for tangent, since the tangent will be the next up and coming section. But for now, for this video, we're just going to be looking at sine and cosine. So there's four letters here representing four variables. A is the amplitude. The amplitude is how high and low the graph will go. Period is where it starts repeating itself. And to find that, you take 2 pi. Reminder, 2 pi is 360 degrees, and divide it by b in this equation. C is the phase or horizontal shift. D is the vertical shift. And like I said before, the tangent, if you're looking for the period for the tangent, it's pi over b instead of 2 pi over b. And like I said, we'll get into that in another video. All right, so that's the general equation we're using. So let me start jumping in here. We're going to want some graph paper probably. I'm just going to start with real basics. Sine of x, y equals sine of x. So a reminder that pi over 2 is 90 degrees, pi is 180 degrees. 3 pi over 2 is 270 degrees, and 2 pi is 360. So, we've talked already about how the sine is the y coordinate, which means if I'm looking at just the y coordinates here, that would be this, and that. So those are the y coordinates, which is what I'm going to graph here. Now, a sine curve so it's going to go 0, and I'm going to mark off that this is going to be pi over 2, this can be pi, this will be, I ran out of space, I gotta fix that. Okay, so the sine of 0, sine always starts here at the middle, at the origin, and then you can see over here that when I go and do the sine of 0, that would be 0. If I go to the sine of 90, or pi over 2, that is going to be 1. So it goes up to 1, which is also the amplitude, okay? The amplitude for this equals 1. The period would be 2 pi. Okay, so it starts and stops at 0, goes to 2 pi. At pi, it's equal to 0. 3 pi over 2 is -1, and back to 0 at 2 pi. So this is a curve, and it goes just like that. And that's one period. If I asked you to do another period, either in the negative direction or in the positive, this does repeat over and over again. So that would be one in the negative direction, or you could have it continue this way, on and on and on. Okay, so anyway, the pink one is what I'm looking to graph today, primarily just get one period down, and I think a lot of it will come into place. Okay. Second one, the cosine of x. So this one, cosine we said is the x coordinate. So this time I'm looking at the x's, 1, 0, -1, 0. So since the cosine starts at 1, make this 1, starts up here. So the cosine starts at the top of the graph, which is different than the sine, obviously, right? So if this is pi over 2, this is pi, here's 3 pi over 2, and here's 2 pi, and here's -1. So it starts here, goes to 0, down to -1, back to 0, and up. So this is what one period of that graph would look like. Now, like I said, this does keep repeating. We're really kind of looking at one period for the most part, but that's what the cosine looks like, a cosine graph. It's actually the same graph up here. It's just moved over pi over 2 units. So anyway, so there's the first two. Now let's talk about amplitude and period. This period was 2 pi. The reason why it was 2 pi is because it started here at 0 and it started repeating at 2 pi. So that would be one period This was one period was 2 pi, or it could have been going to negative 2 pi. That's also a period. But generally we start at 0. Okay, back to these. So this is the equation, right? Now, these aren't too bad, but I need you to start thinking about, what the period and amplitude are. The amplitude is nice and easy. I usually start with that. That's what's ever in front here. In this case, that's the 3. And it's the absolute value, which means it's always positive. So amplitude here is 3. The period, in this case, B is going to be the 2, which means I got 2 pi over 2, which reduces to pi. Okay, so that's the period and the amplitude. Not too bad if they ask you just for that. They're not asking you to graph anything in that one. The next few are the same way. The period, well, the amplitude, let's do the amplitude. Absolute value of negative 5/2 is positive 5/2. That's your amplitude. Period would be 2 pi. Now, x over 2, remember this is the same as 1/2 x, which means b is 1/2, okay? And if you take 2 pi divided by 1/2, you get 4 pi, okay? So that's your period. Remember, divide by 1/2, you flip, you multiply, it means you multiply by 2, okay? Quick refresher on dividing fractions. All right, so that's it. Those are those two answers. Next one. Amplitude, let's do the amplitude, the easy one at first. -1, absolute value of -1/2 is positive 1/2. That's my amplitude, which means it would go up to 1/2 and down to -1/2 on my graph. All right, period is 2 pi. And you kind of ignore the x is the other way you could think about it. It's 2 pi divided by pi over 3. So, you can go 2 pi times 3 over pi if you want. Put it over 1. Cancel these, you get 6. So that's your amplitude on that one. You don't see a lot like that, but they pop up. So that one doesn't have a pi in it. So anyway, I'll get you into graphing those later on. Okay, general graphs. Start with the period and the amplitude. This is going to help a lot. Amplitude, absolute value of 3 is 3. Period, 2 pi over b. B is 2. Gives me pi. Which means when I go over here and I break this up, I'm going to want to break this up so that it starts and stops at pi. Okay, so this is where it stops. Means pi over 2 will go here. And then that's half, which means half of a half is a quarter. Pi over 4, or 3/4 is 3 pi over 4. Okay. Which means, next, and this is going to go up to 3 and down to -3. All right, so that's the height of my graph, is the amplitude. So next I'm going to plot a few points here. Like I said, the cosine, it always starts at the top, goes down to the bottom, and then goes back up to the top, which means this is what my graph is going to look like. And halfway between the top and the bottom, it should cross the x-axis. All right, so that's what one period of that looks like. Okay. Next one. All right, so this one. Period and amplitude. Amplitude, absolute value -4 is 4. I like that one. That's nice and easy. 2 pi. The period will be 2 pi over 1/4. So remember, flip that upside down and multiply. It gives me 8 pi. So I'm going to go over here and plot this out. So it goes up and down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now to -4. And then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them will give me 8 pi, which means I start breaking that up into quarters. It means halfway is 4 pi, half of 4 pi is 2 pi. In between 8 pi and 4 pi is 6 pi. All right. Now, this is negative. And when this is negative, you start the other direction. So instead of going up first, I'm going to go down first. Otherwise, it's really about the same here. So I start at 0, like the sine always does. The sine always starts here. Cosine always starts up here, okay? Now what's different is usually I go like this, but when it's negative, I'm going to go the other direction. I'm going to go down instead, okay? So I'm going to go down, and then I'm going up, and then I'm going up, and down. And that is what your graph should look like, okay? Okay, anyway, next one. Period and amplitude. Amplitude, absolute value of 1/3 is 1/3. Period is 2 pi over b. B is 1/3. Which means flip and multiply, I get 6 pi is my period. All right, so this one's going to have some decimals because I break this into quarters every time. Have you noticed that? That I go, but this time since I got 6 pi, 1, 2, 3, 4. Half is fine, that's 3 pi. We can use decimals on this. I know usually we use fractions, but so half of 3 pi is 1.5 pi. This would be 4.5 pi. Amplitude is 1/3. Remember, you can make that 1/3. You can just label your graph however you want, as long as you label it correctly. All right, so cosine starts at the top. It's not negative, no problem there. So otherwise it would start at the bottom. We'll get into that later. So it starts up here. And the cosine always kind of goes like that, all right? So let me fill in some of these. It goes down to 1/3 at the halfway point, and then back up to the top. So the cosine looks like a V. That's 1 period, okay? If they asked you for 2 periods, you just repeat it, you know? Make it go again. I'm going to run out of space on this one, but you guys will get the idea. That would be 2 periods, because it repeated. Okay, next one. Amplitude. Amplitude is absolute value of 3, right? Coming right from here, which is 3. So it goes up and down to 3. Period is 2 pi. And we better take a look at this one here. So B is going to be 2 pi over 5. So if I go 2 pi over, let me change colors here. This one's, I'm squeezing it into. All right, so I took the denominator, flipped it upside down, and now we multiply. Nice thing is the 2 pi's cancel out here, which leaves me with 5. So that is my period. So up and down to 3. Cosine always starts at the top. This goes up to 3, down to -3, and 5 is 1 period. Which means halfway is 2.5. Halfway between there would be 1.75 and 3.75. I'm not worrying about the decimals there too much. Okay, so cosine. Cosine always starts at the top. If it's positive, which it is, it starts and ends at the same point. A period always starts and stops at the same point. So if it's sine and it starts at 0, then it ends at 0 at the end of 1 period. So the halfway point will be there. Back up. There we go. That's all done. All right, this one. Amplitude. Absolute value -1/2 is +1/2. period is 2 pi over 3. All right, and it's negative, so it's going to start down. You know what? I'm going to change this one. I don't have a negative cosine one yet here. Okay, so I filled in a couple numbers here. It goes, one period is 2 pi over 3, which means halfway point will be pi over 3. Half of pi over 3 is pi over 6. 1/6 times 2 is 1/3. Anyway, so this goes up to 1/2 and down to negative 1/2. Okay. Now the cosine, if it's negative, it starts at the bottom instead of starting at the top. When I say bottom of the amplitude, when negative. Okay, so if I go down here to negative 1/2, that's where I'm going to start. Now remember, a period, it starts and it stops at the same point, at the same height, okay? So this is cosine, so instead of being a V, this is going to be an upside down V. Like that. I got to fix that. Sorry, not a good drawing. Because it should hit the halfway points here and here at the x-axis, okay? I missed, so that's why I fixed that. All right, so that's one period, all right? Next one. Here's a negative cosine. So, period. What's in front of the cosine? In this case is 1. Absolute, well, that's the absolute amplitude. Absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1. Period is 2 pi over b. B in this case is pi over 3. So if you take 2 pi times the reciprocal, pi's cancel, you're left with 6. So that is going to be my period. Let me go back over here to my graph. So I'm going to go up and down to 1. Give a little space because I like to have overlap on here. It goes, so 4 units is 6, which means this is 3, this is 1.5, this is 4.5. All right, and its cosine is negative, which means you're starting at the bottom instead of starting at the top. If you start at the bottom, you end at the bottom. Halfway between, you go up to the top. There it is. There's one period, okay? All right, this one, a little different. Got a little twister on it. So, you know, I think I would almost prefer to have this -5 over here at the end. Because then you can see that it's actually a vertical shift, okay? So, which means it's going to move everything down 5. All right. I don't know if it's going to fit on my graph. All right, let's see. So the amplitude, absolute value of 4 is 4. Period. It's going to be 2 pi over 12. So if I flip and multiply, I get 12 over pi, which gives me 24 is my period. And my vertical shift is going to be -5. Okay. So I usually do 2 graphs on these. I know this is going to be kind of crazy, but let's say I go like this, and I'm going to graph it without the -5 first, okay? So it goes up to 24, which means halfway is 12, half of that is 6, 3/4 is 18. And we said it goes up and down 4. All right, so I had added some space on my graph here. You'll see in a minute. Okay, so it's a sine, and it's positive because the 4 is positive. It doesn't matter about the 5 being negative. So it starts at 0, goes up and down, up to 4, down. So I'm going to do the first one in green. Starts at 0, up, up, down, and up. So it starts at there, goes to here. Okay, so this is what the regular one without the -5 would look like. So this is that one. So if I put the -5 on here, I'm going to do this one. I'm just going to take all of those points and I'm just going to move them down 5. Okay, so here's where this one starts. And this one at 4 goes down to -1, down 5. This one goes down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then down here, back up to here. So you can see all of those points, I just moved them down 5. Okay, and that's the way I find that it's best to do it. Okay, you can do this like a dashed line if you want. I'm good doing different colors. The blue one's my answer. This one would have been the 4 pi x over 12 without the -5, the green one. Okay, so that's the way I did that one. And let's see, we got one more, couple more here. This one, period, absolute value of 2. Nope, amplitude, absolute value of 2, excuse me. Which is 2. Period will be 2 pi over 1/4, which is 8 pi. Horizontal shift. So this one's got a little different. The horizontal shift will be pi over 4, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so it goes up to 2, down to -2. It's cosine, so it's going to start at the top of the graph. It's positive. It's going to start at the top. And my period is 8 pi. So I had a small mistake on there. The period's actually just 2 pi. I did the pi over 4 is not, it's not pi over 4x, so it's not b. In other words, that was actually c in my equation, so please fix that. So my period is 2 pi, and I'm going to move it. The horizontal shift is pi over 4 to the left. When it's positive, you move that to the left, just like we've done other transformations. When it's in the parentheses like that, next to the variable, that's usually moves horizontally, the opposite direction of what you'd think. So it's going to start over there. It's cosine, so it starts at the top of the curve, goes down, and then back up. Okay, so pink starts at the top of the curve, going to end over there, except that this one is going to be moved left one, so I don't want to actually have that point there. Okay, so at the halfway point, which is like here, it's going to hit the bottom, halfway between there and there, the half between 3 pi over 4 and negative pi over 4. It's going to cross the x-axis. So this is going to look like this. And there's my my curve. Okay. Last one. So this one, the amplitude is 3. Absolute value of 3 is 3. Period, once again, let's see if I can not make the same mistake this time, is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. And this one has a horizontal shift of pi over 2, and since it's minus, it's going to be pi over 2 to the right, because it's positive, going to go in the positive direction. Okay, so up and down to 3. Up to 3, down to -3, 2 pi. So if I had an eighth one over here, that would be 2 pi, which means, you know, I'm just breaking it up into quarters. Especially it's nice when I'm moving it. This is going pi over 2 to the right. Okay, so if I start at pi over 2. Actually, I can make this into quarters instead. And this will be pi. This will be 3 pi over 2. This will be 2 pi. This will be, add another pi over 2 gives me 5 pi over 2. Okay. So let's see. Sine starts at 0, goes up and down. I'll do this in 2 different colors here. So usually we go like this, right? 0, 2 pi up to the top, back down to the bottom, up to the top there, down to the bottom here. So this is what it would usually look like. However, this one's got a vertical shift, which means we're going to move that whole curve 1 over to the right. So it's going to start here, and this time it's going to end there, up to the top. Back down to the bottom, back up. So that's what that one's going to look like. Okay, so you can knock that one out, and then you got the orange one is your answer. Okay. And that's all I got for today. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.